I ran the Federal Bureau of Investigation, yet on a dark highway, I was just another black man targeted by a corrupt cop. He had no idea he was about to declare war on the entire U.S. government. The Friday evening traffic was a familiar beast, a slow-moving river of red taillights snaking its way out of Washington, D.C. I loosened my tie, the silk knot feeling like a noose after the week I'd had. Confirmation hearings, endless briefings, shaking hands with people who smiled to your face while sharpening knives behind their backs. It was the kind of week that made you question every choice that led you to this point. All I wanted was to get home to my wife, Sarah, have a glass of whiskey, and forget for a few hours that the security of an entire nation rested, in some small part, on my shoulders. My car, a modest but new dark gray sedan, hummed along smoothly. It was deliberately understated. The last thing I needed was to draw attention. I preferred to be the man in the background, the one nobody noticed until it was too late. It was a skill I'd honed over 20 years of service. Anonymity was a shield. Then I saw them. The unmistakable flash of red and blue lights in my rearview mirror. My stomach didn't just drop. It plummeted. It's a feeling that every black man in America knows. A cold dread that's been passed down through generations. It doesn't matter if you're a janitor or a judge, a plumber or a politician. In that moment, when those lights are on you, you are just one thing, a potential threat. I immediately went through the checklist. Signal, pull over to a well-lit area, kill the engine, turn on the interior light, both hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, don't make any sudden moves. My heart rate was steady, a testament to years of training in situations far more dangerous than this, but the primal fear, the ancestral memory of what a stop like this could become, was still there. It was a ghost that never left. The officer approached the passenger side first, his partner hanging back by the rear of my vehicle, a dark silhouette against the strobing lights. The first officer, whose name tag I'd later learn read Miller, tapped on the window with the lens of his mag light. I powered the window down, the cool night air rushing in. "Evening," I said, keeping my voice level and calm. My hands remained firmly on the wheel. Officer Miller was a caricature of a cop who'd seen too many movies. He had a thick mustache that bristled with self-importance, and a chin that jutted out aggressively. He shone the flashlight directly in my eyes, forcing me to squint. "License and registration." His voice was flat, bored, but with an undercurrent of something sharp and ugly. "Of course, officer," I said. "My wallet is in my left jacket pocket, and the registration is in the glove compartment. May I have your permission to retrieve them?" He grunted, a sound of reluctant approval. I moved with deliberate slowness, narrating my every action. "I'm reaching for my jacket pocket now, sir." I pulled out my wallet, extracted my driver's license, and handed it to him. Then, "I'm now reaching for the glove compartment to get the registration." He snatched the documents from my hand. His eyes scanned my license, then flicked up to my face, then back down. A slow, condescending smirk spread across his lips. "Marcus Thorne," he read aloud, mispronouncing my last name. "Driving a brand new car in this part of town, huh? You a long way from home, Marcus. I live 10 minutes from here, in a neighborhood he couldn't afford on 3 lifetimes of his salary." But I just nodded. "I was just heading home from work, officer." "Work? What kind of work you do?" He leaned in closer, his flashlight beam now dancing around my car's interior, probing the empty passenger seat, the clean floor mats, the back seat where my briefcase sat. "I'm in government," I said, keeping it vague. The truth was too complicated, and frankly, too dangerous for him to know right now. His smirk widened into a grin. "Government, huh? Big shot." He straightened up and walked back to his patrol car. I watched in my rearview mirror as he and his partner, a younger officer who looked nervous, conferred. I knew this dance. This was the part where they ran my plates, my license, looking for a reason, any reason. They'd find nothing. My record was cleaner than a surgeon's scalpel. Miller came back to my window, this time without the flashlight. He handed my documents back. For a second, a flicker of relief went through me, but the look in his eyes killed it instantly. This wasn't over. "Everything check out, officer?" I asked, maintaining the polite facade. "You seem awful nervous, Marcus," he said, ignoring my question. He leaned his forearm on the roof of my car, a gesture of casual dominance. "Got something to be nervous about? Maybe something in the car you don't want me to see?" "No, sir, I'm just tired. It's been a long week. I'd like to get home to my wife." "I bet you would," he drawled. "I'm smelling a strong odor of marijuana coming from your vehicle. I'm going to need you to step out. We're going to have a look around." The air went still. There it was. The lie. The oldest, flimsiest pretext in the book. My car smelled of nothing but the leather protectant the dealership used. I'd never smoked anything in my life. My body was a tool for my job, and I kept it clean. My training screamed at me. I analyzed his stance, the position of his partner, the way his hand was now resting near his sidearm. This was a critical juncture. "Officer, with all due respect, I do not consent to a search of my vehicle," I said, my voice as firm and even as I could make it. "There is no marijuana in my car, and you have no probable cause." Miller's face darkened. The folksy, condescending mask fell away, revealing pure, unadulterated rage. He had been challenged. His authority had been questioned. "I don't need your consent," he snarled, his voice dropping to a low growl. "I said I smell it, and that's all the probable cause I need. Now get out of the car before I drag you out." I knew my rights, but I also knew a losing battle when I saw one. On a dark roadside against two armed men with badges, the Constitution was just a piece of paper. I slowly opened the door and stepped out, hands raised where he could see them. "Turn around, hands on the roof," his partner, the young one, commanded. His voice cracked a little. As I was being patted down, I watched Miller. He swaggered over to the passenger side of my car. He opened the door, and for a split second, his body blocked my view of what he was doing inside. He was only in there for a moment, but it was long enough. When he pulled back out, he left the door ajar and walked to the trunk, making a show of trying to open it. "Pop the trunk," he ordered. "I do not consent to the search," I repeated, my voice muffled against the cold roof of my car. "Pop it, or I'll add obstruction to the charges." This was the charade. He needed the distraction. While his partner kept me pinned, and while I was focused on the trunk, he had done what he intended to do from the very beginning. My mind raced, replaying that split second he was leaning into the passenger seat, the slight rustle of his jacket, the way he shielded his hands. It was subtle, but to a trained eye, it was as loud as a gunshot. He'd just planted something. After another minute of pretending to search, he sauntered back to the open passenger door. "Well, well, well," he said, his voice dripping with faux surprise. He reached under the passenger seat, a place he hadn't even glanced at before. "What do we have here?" He pulled his hand out, and between his thumb and forefinger was a small plastic baggie containing a white, powdery substance. He held it up to the flashing lights as if it were a trophy. "Looks like your long week just got a whole lot longer, Marcus," Miller sneered. His partner came over, slapping a pair of cold, heavy handcuffs on my wrists, the metal clicking shut with a horrifying finality. Miller leaned in close, his breath hot and smelling of stale coffee and cigarettes. He whispered in my ear, his voice a venomous hiss. "You should have just let me search the car, boy. Would have been easier for everyone." He thought he had me. He thought I was just another number, another black man in a nice car to be taken off the street, another statistic to bolster his arrest record. He felt the cold steel on my wrists, saw the resignation he expected to see in my eyes, and he smiled, triumphant. He had no idea who he had just cuffed. He had no idea that he wasn't just arresting a citizen. He was declaring war on the entire federal government. And he was going to lose. Badly. The ride to the precinct was a study in contrasts. Outside, the world continued on. Oblivious couples heading to dinner, teenagers laughing, the mundane rhythm of a Friday night. Inside the back of the patrol car, my world had shrunk to the smell of cheap vinyl and stale sweat, the cage separating me from the two men in the front, and the cold, unyielding bite of the handcuffs on my wrists. Miller was chatty, talking to his younger partner about weekend plans, about some fishing trip. He was performing nonchalance, a man so comfortable in his power that ruining another man's life was as trivial as discussing bait. I remained silent. My anger wasn't a hot, roaring fire. It was a glacier, cold, immense, and moving with unstoppable force. I was no longer Marcus Thorne, husband and citizen. I was Director Thorne, and I was actively gathering intelligence from behind enemy lines. I noted their badge numbers. Miller's was 714. His partner, whose name tag read Davis, was 922. I memorized the layout of the streets, the time it took to get to the station. Every detail was a future exhibit in the case I was building in my head. The station was exactly what you'd expect. Harsh fluorescent lights that made everyone look sick, the smell of burnt coffee and industrial cleaner, and a profound sense of weary bureaucracy. A bored-looking desk sergeant barely glanced up as Miller and Davis pushed me towards the booking desk. "Look what we got here, Sarge," Miller announced, his voice booming with pride. "Found a big shot from D.C., holding some serious party favors." He slammed the baggie of white powder on the counter for emphasis. The sergeant, a paunchy man with tired eyes, grunted. This was just another Friday night for him. The process was a well-oiled machine of dehumanization. They took my belt, my shoelaces, my watch, a gift from Sarah, for my 20th anniversary with the Bureau. They logged every item with a detached efficiency that was somehow more insulting than Miller's overt racism. Then came the fingerprints. As I rolled each finger in the cold black ink, I stared directly at Miller, who was leaning against a wall, arms crossed, savoring the spectacle. I made sure my expression was utterly blank. I would give him nothing. Not fear, not anger, not despair. I was a gray stone, and he could dash himself against me all he wanted. Then came the mugshot. Turn to the right. Now the left. Face forward, the officer with the camera droned. The flash popped, momentarily blinding me. In that split second of darkness, I pictured that photo. I knew where it would end up. Not in some criminal database, but framed on my desk at the Hoover Building, a stark reminder of why we do what we do. A reminder that the rot we fight isn't always in some foreign land or terrorist cell. Sometimes it wears a badge and a smirk. They put me in an interrogation room while they waited for the paperwork to clear. It was a small, windowless box with a metal table and 2 chairs. Miller came in and sat across from me, dropping a thin file on the table. "So, Marcus," he began, leaning back in his chair like a king on his throne. "Here's the deal. We found about 10 grams of cocaine in your car. That's a felony. Possession with intent to distribute. You're looking at serious time. Years." He let that hang in the air. "But maybe we can help each other out. You tell me who your supplier is. Give us a bigger fish to fry. And maybe the DA goes easy on you. Maybe this all just becomes a bad memory." I stared at him, my mind a whirring supercomputer. He wasn't just a corrupt cop. He was an idiot. He was trying to get a confession for a crime he'd fabricated, likely to build a fictional case against a non-existent supplier. This wasn't just about one bad stop. This was a pattern. This was a racket. "I'd like to make my phone call," I said, my voice flat. Miller laughed, a short barking sound. "Oh, right. The phone call. Gonna call your high-priced lawyer. Good luck. It's Friday night. He's probably 3 martinis deep at the country club." He stood up and gestured for me to follow him. He led me to a phone bolted to a wall in the booking area. "1 call, 5 minutes," he grunted, standing close enough to hear every word. This was part of the show. He wanted to hear me beg. He wanted to hear the panic in my voice as I tried to explain this to my wife or a lawyer. I picked up the receiver. I didn't call Sarah. I wouldn't put her through that. I didn't call my lawyer. This was far beyond a simple legal matter now. I dialed a number I knew better than my own. A secure line that bypassed all switchboards. It rang twice. "Chen," a calm, professional voice answered. "David Chen, my deputy director. A man whose mind was as sharp as a scalpel and whose loyalty was absolute." "David, it's Marcus," I said, keeping my voice steady. Miller snorted behind me, amused. "Director, is everything all right? Your security detail said you were driving home alone." David's voice was instantly laced with concern. "I've hit a bit of a snag, David. I'm at the Northwood precinct. A local matter," I said, choosing my words with surgical precision. "Listen carefully. I need you to initiate Protocol Nightingale, effective immediately, full deployment." There was a half-second of stunned silence on the other end of the line. Protocol Nightingale. It was a designation we'd created for a catastrophic internal security breach. It was reserved for situations where a top-level government official was compromised on U.S. soil. Not by a foreign power, but by a domestic threat. It was a ghost protocol, one we hoped we'd never have to use. It authorized everything from electronic surveillance to tactical team deployment, all under my direct authority, bypassing all local and state jurisdictions. It was a silent declaration of war. "Understood, sir," David said, his voice now cold steel. There was no more questioning, no hesitation. "ETA? Make it swift," I said, and hung up the phone. I turned to face Miller, who was shaking his head with a condescending smile. "Protocol Nightingale?" he mocked, mimicking my voice. "Sounds fancy. What's that? The code word for your boyfriend to come bail you out?" I just looked at him. I didn't say a word. "Whatever," he scoffed, grabbing my arm. "Back to the cell, movie star." He shoved me into a small concrete holding cell with a single metal bench. The heavy steel door slammed shut with a deafening clang, the lock echoing in the sudden silence. The sound was meant to signify the end of my freedom, the beginning of my nightmare. Miller stood on the other side of the bars for a moment, his face split by a triumphant grin. He thought he had won. He thought that sound was the final chord in my downfall. He had no idea it was the starting pistol, and he was standing at the finish line. The air in the holding cell was thick with the ghosts of past miseries. Despair seemed to have soaked into the concrete itself. I sat on the cold metal bench, not in fear, but in a state of hyper-aware calm. I could hear the mundane sounds of the precinct through the steel door. Phones ringing, the distant murmur of voices, the clatter of a keyboard. To them, I was just another piece of human inventory, processed and stored. They were completely oblivious to the storm that was gathering just beyond their horizon, a tempest of federal power ready to break directly over their heads. I estimated David's timeline. Protocol Nightingale wasn't just a phone call. It was a cascade. My call would have triggered an immediate alert to the head of my security detail, the Joint Terrorism Task Force liaison, and the U.S. Attorney for this district. A team from the nearest FBI field office, likely the elite hostage rescue team that was always on standby, would be mobilizing. They'd be gearing up not for a rescue but for a surgical extraction and containment operation. They would secure me, and then they would secure the entire precinct as a federal crime scene. David would be coordinating it all from the Strategic Information and Operations Center at headquarters, watching everything unfold on a dozen different screens. Miller and Davis were a symptom of a larger disease. A cop doesn't get this brazen, this comfortable with fabricating felonies without a support system. He needs a partner who will stay quiet, a sergeant who will look the other way, and maybe even a prosecutor who is willing to play ball for the sake of easy convictions. This wasn't about just two dirty cops. This was about rooting out a cancer. An hour crawled by, then another. The initial adrenaline gave way to a cold, patient focus. I wasn't waiting for a rescue. I was waiting for the commencement of an operation that I had set in motion. Suddenly, the monotonous hum of the station was broken by a new sound. It was subtle at first, a low thrumming that vibrated through the floor. A helicopter. No, more than one. Getting closer. Fast. I heard a commotion outside my cell, voices rising in confusion and alarm. The desk sergeant barked something I couldn't make out. I stood up and walked to the bars of my cell door, peering down the short hallway into the main booking area. I saw the sergeant on his feet staring at the front entrance, his mouth hanging open. Davis, the younger officer, looked pale and terrified. Then the doors to the precinct burst open. It wasn't a slow, hesitant entry. It was an explosion of motion and purpose. 6 figures, clad in black tactical gear from head to toe, swarmed into the room. They wore no identifying police patches, only the bold yellow letters on their backs and chests. FBI. They moved with a fluid, terrifying efficiency, fanning out to cover every angle of the room. The lead agent, a man built like a refrigerator, held an M4 carbine leveled at the chest of the stunned desk sergeant. "Nobody move. Hands where I can see them." His voice, amplified by his helmet's comms system, was not a request. It was a physical force that froze every officer in the room. 2 more agents moved to disarm a bewildered Miller and a trembling Davis, who were standing near the booking desk. Miller started to bluster, his face turning a shade of purple. "What the hell is this? Who the hell do you think you are?" The agent pinning him against the wall didn't even flinch. "Federal Bureau of Investigation. You're being detained as part of a federal investigation. You have the right to remain silent." While the local cops were being secured with zip ties, a man in a tailored suit strode through the doors. He moved with an air of calm authority that parted the sea of tactical gear. It was David Chen. His face was a mask of cold fury, but his eyes, when they met mine through the bars of the cell, held a flicker of profound relief. He walked directly to my cell, followed by an agent carrying a heavy-duty bolt cutter. He didn't say a word to me at first. He just looked at the cell, then at the key rack behind the sergeant's desk, then back at the cell door, his expression one of pure disgust, as if the very existence of the lock was a personal insult. "Get him out. Now," David said, his voice quiet but carrying more weight than the shouts of the tactical team. The agent with the bolt cutters stepped forward, but Miller, cuffed and on his knees, found his voice again. He was laughing, a hysterical, unhinged sound. "You can't do this. That man is a prisoner. He's a felon. I found a felony amount of cocaine in his car. This is my arrest. This is my collar." David turned his head slowly, his gaze falling upon Miller. It was a look I'd seen him give to uncooperative foreign intelligence assets and high-level mob informants. It was a look that could strip paint. "Your collar?" David repeated, his voice dangerously soft. He took a slow step towards Miller, his polished shoes silent on the grimy floor. The agents holding Miller tensed, but David waved them off. He knelt down so he was eye level with the pathetic kneeling officer. "Officer Miller," David said, his tone conversational, as if they were discussing the weather. "You made 2 mistakes tonight. The first was planting narcotics on a federal officer. That's a felony that will land you in a place where your badge won't mean a thing." Miller's laughing stopped. His eyes widened, a flicker of genuine fear finally breaking through his bluster. "Federal officer? What are you talking about? He's just some government pencil pusher." David almost smiled. It was a chilling sight. "That's your second mistake, Officer Miller. Your biggest one." Did you like... He stood up and gestured toward my cell, where the agent was just snipping through the thick metal hasp of the lock. The door swung open with a groan. I stepped out of the cell, my wrists still bound behind my back. An agent immediately came forward with a key and unlocked the cuffs. I rubbed my wrists, the blood flowing back into my hands. David turned back to Miller, his voice rising just enough for everyone in the room to hear. "You didn't just arrest some pencil pusher. You put your hands on, you falsely arrested, and you fabricated evidence against the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." A collective gasp went through the room. The desk sergeant looked like he was going to have a heart attack. Davis, the young partner, actually fainted, slumping forward into the agent holding him. But the most satisfying reaction was Miller's. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty gray mask of pure, unadulterated terror. The swagger, the confidence, the racism, it all evaporated in an instant, replaced by the dawning horrific understanding of the magnitude of his error. He looked at me, truly looked at me for the first time, and in his eyes I saw the abyss opening up to swallow him whole. David wasn't finished. He held up a tablet, the screen glowing in the dim light. "While you were enjoying your power trip, Officer Miller, a federal warrant was issued for this entire precinct. Every file, every computer, every locker is now the property of the U.S. government. We already have a team pulling every case file you've ever been associated with, every arrest you've ever made. We're going to tear your whole crooked house down, brick by brick. Your career isn't over. Your life as you know it is." He turned to me. "Sir, your car has been swept and is secure. We have the planted evidence. It's already on its way to the lab at Quantico." I nodded, my eyes still locked on Miller. I saw him staring at the small, clear baggie of white powder now sitting in an evidence container on the sergeant's desk, the little lie he thought would ruin my life. He had no idea that baggie wasn't just evidence anymore. A teacher who just finished grading papers all evening, a son on his way to visit his sick mother? Or was I just a color and a cliché in your head? You didn't see a person. You saw a target, an easy statistic. You were so blinded by your prejudice that you couldn't see the truth, even when it was printed on the driver's license in your hand. I stood up and turned to David. "I want his partner, Officer Davis, in a separate room. I want to talk to him. Now." Davis, who had been helped back to his feet and was now leaning against a wall, looking like he was about to vomit, flinched as if I'd struck him. 2 agents gently but firmly guided the young officer into the same interrogation room, where Miller had tried to intimidate me less than 2 hours before. I followed them in, leaving David to oversee the systematic dismantling of the Northwood Police Precinct. The room felt different now. The power dynamic had been completely upended. I sat in the chair Miller had occupied, and Davis sat opposite, wringing his hands, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape that wasn't there. "Officer Davis," I began, my tone even, "you are in a world of trouble. Conspiracy to deprive a citizen of his civil rights under color of law. That carries a sentence of up to 10 years in a federal prison. Perjury. Obstruction of justice. I could keep going. Your partner's career is over. What happens to yours is entirely up to you, and it will be decided in the next 5 minutes." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. I didn't know," he stammered. "Don't," I cut him off, my voice sharp. "Don't insult my intelligence. You were there. You saw him lean into my car. You heard him invent the smell of marijuana. You stood by and said nothing. That makes you a co-conspirator. Silence is consent, officer." He broke. Tears welled in his eyes and streamed down his pale cheeks. Miller. He does this all the time. He calls it proactive policing. He says it's how you make a name for yourself, how you get the good cases. He showed me how. Find a nice car in a neighborhood where you think it doesn't belong. Manufacture probable cause. Everyone does it. "Everyone?" I asked, leaning forward. My gut had been right. This wasn't just Miller. This was a culture, a sickness. Not Not everyone, he backpedaled, terrified, but a lot of guys, the older ones. They call it the Northwood Way. They have a system. Miller has a locker at his gym. He keeps his toolkit there. My blood ran cold. A toolkit. A stash of drugs and unregistered weapons to be planted. This was organized crime wearing a badge. "What's in this locker, Davis?" I pressed, keeping my voice calm. "Everything you tell me can help you. Everything you hide will bury you. Baggies, like the one he put in your car. Different kinds. Pot, coke, pills. Sometimes he uses drop guns. Old, untraceable pieces for when a suspect reaches for a weapon. He says you have to be prepared to make the story stick." It was worse than I could have imagined. This precinct wasn't just corrupt. It was a predator. It was hunting the very citizens it was sworn to protect. "Give me the address of the gym, the locker number, the combination," I commanded. Davis rattled it off without hesitation, the information spilling out of him in a desperate torrent. He was a drowning man grasping for a life raft. As he spoke, I was already texting David the details on my phone. David's reply came back in seconds. "Team is en route. We'll get a warrant on the way." I stood up. "You did the right thing, Officer Davis. It doesn't absolve you, but it's a start. You will give a full sworn statement to my agents. You will testify. If you're telling me the absolute truth, I will speak to the U.S. Attorney on your behalf. That's the best I can offer." He nodded, sobbing. I left him with 2 of my agents and walked back into the main area. The place was now a hive of activity. FBI agents were everywhere carrying out boxes of files, imaging computer hard drives. The desk sergeant and the other officers were being formally questioned one by one. I found Miller being led away in handcuffs by 2 federal agents. His face was no longer terrified. It was hollow, empty, the face of a man whose world had been erased. As he passed me, he stopped. "Why?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Why you? Out of all the cars on the road tonight, why did I have to pull over you?" I looked him straight in the eye. "You've got the question wrong, Miller," I said, my voice low. "You think this is about bad luck, about pulling over the one guy you shouldn't have. But you should be asking yourself how many other lives you've destroyed. How many innocent people are in prison because of you and your toolkit? You just finally pulled over a man who had the power to pull back the curtain and show the world exactly what you are." He flinched as if I'd hit him. The agents led him away, a ghost in a uniform. An hour later, David approached me, holding his phone. His face was grim. "Sir," he said, "the team got into the locker at the gym. And it was exactly as Davis described, a full-service frame shop, drugs, illegal weapons, cash. But there's something else. They found a ledger." My stomach tightened. "A ledger? It's coded," David said, swiping through photos on his phone. "But it looks like a list of names, dates, and payments. He wasn't just framing people for his arrest stats, sir. It looks like he was taking orders, planting evidence for hire." He paused, his eyes grave. "We've just started running the names in the ledger. The first one we got a hit on. It's a federal judge." My mind reeled. This wasn't just a corrupt precinct. This was a conspiracy that reached far beyond these walls, into the very heart of the justice system we were sworn to uphold. Miller wasn't just a crooked cop. He was a weapon. And someone had been pointing him. The name of the federal judge hung in the air between us, heavy and toxic. Judge Alistair Beaumont, a man known for his harsh sentencing, his tough-on-crime rhetoric, and his surprisingly high conviction rate, especially in cases with circumstantial evidence. It was a name I knew well. He'd been a U.S. attorney before his appointment to the bench, a contemporary of mine. We'd never been friends, but our paths had crossed. The idea that he was connected to Miller's sordid little enterprise turned the case from a local corruption scandal into a national security crisis. A federal judge with the power to put a dirty cop on a payroll could compromise any case, silence any witness, pervert justice in ways that could take decades to unravel. "Get me a full workup on Beaumont," I ordered David, my voice a low growl. "Financials, communications, known associates. I want to know who he had breakfast with this morning and why. And get that ledger to Quantico. I want our best cryptanalysts on it yesterday. This is now Operation Blind Justice. Highest priority." The next 72 hours were a blur of controlled chaos. From a hastily set-up command post in our D.C. field office, we directed a sprawling, multi-pronged investigation. While one team of agents meticulously went through every file, every piece of evidence seized from the Northwood precinct, another began the painstaking work of identifying the other names in Miller's ledger. The picture that emerged was horrifying. The names weren't just random citizens. They were specific targets. Small business owners in litigation with larger corporations, political activists, journalists who had been digging into local real estate deals, and a disturbingly high number of defendants in cases that had been presided over by Judge Beaumont himself. Miller, stripped of his power and bravado, was singing like a canary. Faced with a mountain of evidence and the prospect of spending the rest of his life in a federal penitentiary, he gave up his master. It was Beaumont. The judge had been using Miller for years as his personal enforcer, a tool to eliminate legal and financial threats under the guise of the law. Beaumont would feed Miller a target, Miller would plant evidence, and the victim would be fed into a justice system where Beaumont himself often waited on the bench to deliver the final, devastating blow. The cash in Miller's locker was payment for his services, a dirty little retainer. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place when the cryptanalyst broke the code in the ledger. It wasn't just a list of names. It was a shadow docket. Beside each target's name was a notation indicating the type of evidence to be planted, and a reference number that corresponded to a specific case file, many of which led directly back to Beaumont's court. Armed with Miller's confession, Davis's testimony, and the decoded ledger, the U.S. attorney, a woman I trusted implicitly, drew up the arrest warrant. There would be no fanfare, no press leaks. A compromised federal judge had to be handled with the precision of a bomb disposal unit. I decided to be there myself. Not for revenge, but for accountability. I needed to see it through to the end. We arrived at Judge Beaumont's stately home in a quiet, affluent suburb at dawn. No flashing lights, no sirens, just a few dark sedans pulling silently to the curb. I walked up the stone path with David and 2 senior agents. I rang the doorbell. After a moment, the door opened. Judge Beaumont stood there in a silk dressing gown, a cup of coffee in his hand. He was tall, silver-haired, with an aristocratic bearing that had always seemed more arrogant than dignified. He saw me, and for a fraction of a second his composure wavered. A flicker of confusion, then recognition, crossed his face. "Director Thorne," he said, his voice smooth as polished marble. "To what do I owe this early morning visit?" "Judge Beaumont," I replied, my tone devoid of any emotion. "You have a visitor." At that moment, from behind me, Officer Miller stepped forward, flanked by 2 federal agents. He was in a prison jumpsuit, the bright orange a shocking splash of color in the manicured entryway. He wouldn't look at Beaumont. He just stared at the floor, a broken man. Beaumont's face went white. The coffee cup slipped from his fingers, shattering on the marble floor, the dark liquid spreading like a pool of blood. The mask of judicial authority disintegrated, revealing the hollow, panicked man beneath. He finally understood. His weapon had been turned against him. "Alistair Beaumont," I said as the agent stepped forward with the handcuffs. "You are under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent." He didn't resist. He didn't speak. All the powerful rhetoric and legal bluster he commanded from the bench were gone. He was just another criminal, brought down by the very system he had sworn to uphold and had so thoroughly corrupted. The aftermath was a long and arduous process of cleaning the wound. The Northwood precinct was effectively disbanded, taken into federal receivership. A dozen other officers were indicted as part of the conspiracy. Every case touched by Miller or presided over by Beaumont was reopened, reviewed by an independent task force. Dozens of wrongful convictions were overturned, and innocent people whose lives had been shattered by the Northwood way were finally set free. My story, the story of my arrest, never became public. We contained it. It wasn't about me. It was about the system. A public scandal involving the FBI director would have eroded public trust at a time when we needed it most to clean house. My anonymity, once again, was my most effective shield. A few weeks later, I was back in my car, driving home on that same stretch of road. It was another Friday evening, the river of red taillights just as slow. But something was different. The air felt cleaner. The rule of law for this small corner of the world had been reaffirmed. I had used my power not for retribution, but for restoration. When I got home, Sarah was waiting for me. She knew a heavily redacted version of what had happened, and she knew it had changed me. She wrapped her arms around me, and I held her tight, the knot in my chest from that night finally beginning to loosen. Later I went into my home office. On my desk, next to a picture of Sarah, was a simple, clear acrylic block. Encased within it was a small plastic baggie containing a white, powdery substance. It was the one Miller had planted in my car. It served as my constant reminder. A reminder that justice is not a monolith. It's a fragile construction, built and maintained by imperfect people. It's a reminder that the lines we draw between order and chaos, lawman and lawbreaker, are only as strong as the integrity of the people tasked with defending them. And it's a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous threats aren't the ones we hunt in the shadows, but the ones hiding in plain sight, wearing a badge or a judge's robe, waiting for the right car to drive by on a dark night.